Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Public Health Future Starts Now webinar on human-centered design. My name is Michelle James and I am the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement here at Emory's Rollins School of Public Health. Created by our Rollins Alumni Board, this webinar series explores the intersection of innovation, technology, and public health. Our hope is that these sessions inspire new ways to think about your work in public health and perhaps inspire some new career paths for our Rollins alumni and students and fellow public health practitioners. At this time, I want to turn the program over to Niles Friedman, President of our Rollins Alumni Board and the creator of this series. Niles is a government innovation leader, strategist, and the founding executive advisor at Start Insights, where he specializes in creating and growing businesses and core functions within organizations. Over the last 15 years, Niles's work has emphasized innovation, technology strategy, and digital transformation across the public sector. Hence, the idea for this series. So Niles, I'll let you take it away and introduce our great speakers today.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone. We are very excited about today's discussion around human-centered design and the value and the power of an MPH and what that means across many different sectors. As Michelle mentioned, this is part of a larger series that we kicked off last year, really thinking about how tech, how innovation are influencing public health, and what does that mean for all of us that are part of this public health atmosphere and community and environment, because there's a lot of change happening. And what does that mean for us on a really practical level? What does that mean for our work? What does that mean for our careers? What does that mean how we think about the future of public health? So this is an amazing discussion today and session that's kind of going deep into an area, but from sort of the genesis of human-centered design, it really is a foundation if you think about our education with an MPH, right? If you think about folks in any sector across public health, human-centered design or some form of that really is foundational to the work that we all do. So really excited to dive in. We've got 4 amazing alumni, all from Rollins, that have built careers looking at human-centered design, using human-centered design, pioneering approaches around human-centered design from a consulting perspective, from a policy perspective, working in pharma as well as also in tech. So really excited to get the diverse perspective. And really would love to just kick us off. And Michelle, you've been an amazing collaboration partner on this session. So want to give kudos to you for that. And would love to maybe, if you want to kick us off, and this will go for everyone on the panel, talk a little bit about your background and then how you've seen the value of human-centered design in your specific work.
Cool. Thank you. So I'm Michelle. I'm a UX researcher in pharma and health tech. Wait, what was the intro?
Oh, just a little bit about your background, human-centered design. What does that mean for you? And
Okay.
sort of the value, you've had this amazing experience in like pharma and tech and all those different areas. Yeah.
Yeah. So I graduated from Rollins in 2020 and my background was in behavioral and social sciences. And so I guess just to start, it's really interesting. Like, even though I started like in program evaluation and as a consultant, and now I'm a UX researcher, I think the main skills that I use are those like community-based research skills and a lot of the methodology that goes into that. So even when I'm not technically working with communities, depending on the project, even now, I still pull from like that skill set. And so especially working in pharma and the health tech group within the pharma company, I'm working with patients and scientists and doctors, but I'm still always like thinking of different aspects of accessibility and who do our participants look like and just all of that. So I really just love the way I can use my public health skills in ways that I didn't originally think of when I was applying to even go to grad school. I'll stop there for now. I'll ramble. So I'll kick it off to.
No, I love it. And this is what we talked about originally, this idea, because human-centered design has become a bigger thing I've seen in the last maybe 10 years. But like you said, it's so foundational to someone who has an MPH, has worked in the public health space for years, And so it's amazing to see it sort of take on a different form across so many different sectors. I mean, we'll get into this in a little bit, but the tech sector has really started to embrace human-centered design on a level that I hadn't seen until probably about 10, maybe 15 years ago. So I love it. Who would love to go next? Just quick intro and how you see the value of human-centered design in your work.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. My
Right.
trajectory is kind of similar to Michelle's. So I was also in BShe's, Go BShe, and was also interested in like health tech, specifically around like mental health apps, web-based interventions for managing symptoms and like connecting people to care for mental health. Also started in the evaluation space as well. So evaluating these programs and these services and like trying to really understand, are they helping people the way that we are wanting them to? Are they making things easier the way that we are expecting them to? And through that process was actually like introduced to the broader world of user experience. And I'm currently a UX researcher for Amazon Web Services. And so my day-to-day work is not in public health, but all of those skills that I learned at BShe's, all of that work that I was doing for program evaluation is directly related to the work that I do day to day. So bringing those methodologies, taking a human-centered approach to how we are building products and services, and really applying those same like theories and processes to a very techie space, a very technical techie space. Is really interesting. It's interesting to see those cross sections. So yeah.
Well, I love this point though, because it's really important, right? Because the skills, the behaviors, the way you when you came through an MPH at Rollins, those thought processes, what you're saying is those have transcended the sectors that I work in, right? And the value of working in a tech space or tech-oriented space and bringing that perspective in, it's not only so valuable, but it's really important, right? Because you're getting at like, if we're creating solutions, if we're creating tech and innovative resources, right, for lack of better words, are we ensuring that they're being developed in a way that is connected to the person that needs them or is going to use them? So I love that, the spirit of what you just mentioned, because it's talking about how the value of an MPH really transcends all these different sectors we're talking about today. Love it.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Yeah,
I can jump in.
oh, sorry. Go ahead,
No,
Julian.
you go ahead. You were first.
Okay. Hi, I'm Katie. I thought I would jump in here because it also seems like I have a very similar trajectory as Michelle and Mujahida. So I also got my master's degree from Rollins in BShe. And my discovery of kind of human-centered design and tech, it was a little bit more of a journey for me. Right after graduation, I actually worked in kind of like more traditional public health government contracting for a while, doing a lot of like health communications research. And then it wasn't until 2020, I graduated in 2016. It wasn't until 2020 that I made the transition into UX and human-centered design. And since then, I've been a researcher for a small UX research agency called Amplinate. And we mainly work for like big tech clients. Although we do some work, we have done some work for the government and pharma here and there. But yeah, similarly to the other panelists here, human-centered design came very naturally to me because in a sense, it is what we have all been doing in our public health positions as well, researching people's needs, their challenges, and then working with people and communities using participatory techniques to develop interventions, develop programming, and now to develop technology. I think specifically, my MPH gave me a lot of hard skills that have helped me do human-centered design research well. And then, as Mujahida was kind of talking about, I think a lot of the content and the techniques I learned around behavioral change theories and health communications has even helped me when it comes to like designing impactful user experiences that are going to shape people's behavior. And then also, you know, some of the communications techniques as well, like does translate into, you know, creating product copy or marketing strategies. So there's a lot of transferable skills there, and definitely have seen kind of the continuity of human-centered design methodologies throughout my entire career, despite the sort of sector change.
Yeah, I love it. And well, there's so many things here, but this idea, especially in government, right? How can a human-centered design approach to work become more foundational? So it's almost not seen as like a nice to have. It's like it's a starting point for anything you're doing. Think about government work. You're creating services, you're creating products, you're creating an experience for people and the public that government is serving. And if you're able to embed that in, I mean, the power is pretty amazing, because there's been this movement, and we talked about this a little bit as a group before, across the federal levels, but also state and local levels around innovation offices. And sometimes at the core of those innovation offices are UX designers and human-centered design experts that are coming in and supporting the development or support of projects. But how does that become now almost more of the status quo, right? As you start to think about it. And I think some of the points you mentioned, it starts to also elevate this point of the value of an MPH. So you can be a technologist in government as an example, but if you're a technologist with an MPH, there's a different level, I think, of value that you're bringing because of all those additional skills you mentioned. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, and I can wrap this one up, and thank you, to the other panelists for all they shared. I relate to a lot of what they've been saying, and I wasn't in, I didn't do the BC program at Rollins, but I was actually in epidemiology. For me, it was kind of like it felt like a fundamental sort of core kind of program where I could, get a deep understanding of what, how public health and public health data works, and kind of be able to dip my toe into all the other things that I was interested in. But human-centered design as a philosophy or a practice sort of really started to interest me in 2018. I was working at I studied environmental science, but through a lens of like environmental health, and I was working at a new vector control program in Puerto Rico that they had just started to try to establish this program, and we're looking for ways to engage with communities. And at the same time, I was learning about human-centered design, and there weren't a lot of resources for kind of that intersection between human-centered design and public health. And as I was kind of ramping up my knowledge on that, and I was seeing this program kind of firsthand apply a lot of the same principles to effectively engage with their communities and apply interventions that they were looking to implement. And that's sort of when it all kind of clicked for me, that human-centered design was this very inherently, or like public health was this very inherently human-centered work and field of work that I felt that had a sort of rather natural path to to practice as a human-centered designer, or as a person in the HCD field. And that really inspired me to try to find ways to apply HCD into a lot of my practice. And EPI was kind of like a foundational sort of core experience for me to really learn about public health and how to work with data and become very data literate. And although as a user experience researcher now in my current role, I don't really do a lot of quantitative research, it is still a part of my work that I have to deal with. And so I see that having that experience and to see firsthand how a new program sort of really applied a lot of those same principles to really effectively engage with the community and apply a new public health program, it really cemented the idea that was something that was possible for me in humans as a human-centered design practitioner in a different area. Mm-hmm. And I'm really happy that I did. It's been a really cool experience. I currently I've supported as a user experience researcher several different government clients. I work for a small federal contracting firm, and it's been mainly supporting the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and public health and Medicaid policy and Medicaid and CHIP policy. And health policy is this whole other world, and so there's a lot of learning that you continue to do despite the public health kind of background that I did have. But it really prepared me to kind of it positioned me to really be in a good spot to kind of absorb all that information, and then tie it along with the experience of just or the skills of being a researcher, being a public health researcher, an academic researcher, and ultimately a user experience researcher. So yeah, all of these things sort of kind of connected, and in practice is what I've actually been able to see, that it was quite a quite natural transition despite it not really feeling like it, in the beginning. So
Very good. Well, I'd love to build upon this point because you all have just spoken about this, and there's different ways it's showing up for each of you. But I would love to go a little deeper just for a second. So you all were graduates of Rollins in 2016, and 3 of you were 2020. When you were going through your degree, were there different ways? Was it called human-centered design? I mean, that's the part that I find is really fascinating. There's a brand around this now. But when I went through Rollins, this was quite a few years ago, it was talked about through the lens of community engagement, and it was doing listening sessions that were out in the community. I was a health policy management major, but there was, even in some of the classes I took, that was really at the forefront of how they were talking about this. But I'd love to go around the group and just hear for you all, when you were going through your Rollins education and then into maybe your first couple jobs, how was that showing up? Was it called human-centered design? What were some of the other words, maybe some of the other ways it was being communicated?
I know for me, for example, in BC, we had to do what was the class? Community assessment. And so you partner with a community, usually a nonprofit, get to know them, understand their different needs, their different assets, conduct research. And doing a community assessment is essentially what you would call like discovery research or foundational research as a UX researcher.
Yes.
I still talk about honestly my experience in that class since that was really like real world experience, but the language is different, but I still pull from those experience. For example, in my community assessment, that was the first time doing a windshield survey where you drive around a neighborhood and understand like what is there, what's happening, who are the people there. And at work now they probably say, oh, like let's do some field work or let's use like ethnographic methods. And some of that language is similar, but I definitely didn't hear the term human-centered design. I think the main terminology was a lot of community-based design or community based participatory research. I feel like a lot of UX and human-centered design pulls from community-based participatory research for sure.
I think
Yeah,
that's right.
Definitely.
fully
Love it.
agree with that there. I think I might have annoyed my friends when we first like graduated because everything that happened, like anytime I saw something, I was like, oh, that's CBPR. Like, oh, they're doing a windshield survey. I think I was watching like Kitchen Nightmares with Gordon Ramsay, and he like does that part where he walks around the neighborhoods and is like, what are the other restaurants selling? What are their price points? What type of customers? I was like, that is just a windshield survey. He's doing a windshield survey on Kitchen Nightmares right now. So like Michelle was saying, I think the language differs. It changes depending on what like field or sector you're in, but like once you have the skill set and you know how to like apply the methodologies in the right places, you can always apply them like when needed. So I do a lot of CBPR in my work, but we don't call it that. Like Michelle said, it's either field work or we're doing foundational research or we're doing generative research to understand user needs. But it's still all of those things that we learned in community assessment. So
Love it. Love that practical sort of applicability. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add as well. Yeah, I never heard the term design back in 2014 to 2016 for sure. Definitely plus one to kind of hearing about it in terms of like participatory methodologies. Another thing, like within the health communications field, we talked about a lot was like formative research. And this is, within the scope of HCD, like this is what we would call, yeah, like generative research, foundational research. But even like, like other primary research methods that we use within public health, like if we're looking at like intervention, like evaluation, that's sort of akin to like doing sort of more evaluative user experience studies. Yeah, I really feel like we're using sort of the same core approaches, but just different nomenclature. Um, Although I do think there are some additional skill sets related to human-centered design that maybe public health like doesn't emphasize as much. And some of this, like from my experience, has been more around like the processes of like iteration, ideation, like this emphasis on innovation that I feel like in public health we're not really taught to do so much. We're a very evidence-based field, right? So we're taught to sort of like go back to the literature, like don't reinvent the wheel, go back to the literature, see kind of like what has worked in the past. Whereas I found with like human-centered design and especially working in like the tech sector, you're looking more at kind of like what are new opportunity spaces that have like never been done before. And there are a lot of reasons for that, some of which is like, these companies want to gain competitive advantage and like create something new. Um, but I do find that like there are some skill sets within HCD that like maybe don't exist in public health as well.
Yeah, that
Very
concept of
good.
innovation
Love
was
it.
pretty new to me. And when I started kind of practicing in kind of HCD teams, and especially because of our, in public health, there's not really a lot of opportunity to do that. But I do really agree with like, the nomenclature is changing and depending on the area, the field that you're working in. And I started to find a lot of especially in my transition from, being a public health practitioner to an HCD practitioner and like from occupying a public health role to a UX researcher role, I found my success both in like in the part of actually finding professional opportunities and work, and also in being able to apply those things when I started to reframe a lot of my experiences around what those things were. And that to me was like a key change in my mindset, but also in how I presented myself and in how I was able to kind of execute what I the skills that I did have. And in doing so, you also sort of uncover, how you need to change depending on the teams that you're on and the content that you're working on and the subject matter, whatever it may be. There's some nuance to it that's going to make your approach a little bit different. And so, yeah, to me, accepting that kind of that reframe was a pivotal moment in being able to kind of move from one type of role to the next.
Love it. And there's just a kind of a theme here that I know we'll talk about in a few minutes about skills and sort of what does this look like if you're thinking about maybe something in the future for folks that are in attendance today. But I love this point you all are making around this adaptability, right? To be able to reframe the way you think, right? And that I believe that comes from an MPH. I think that comes from other things as well, but the MPH sort of trains you. It gives you the ways to be very adaptable and to be a bit of a chameleon in an environment. And to Katie's point, stay true to methods and stay true to practices. But that is a really powerful dimension. And actually, I'd love to bring in a question that we actually have from an attendee. And I'd love to just open it up to the group and say the question is really around if I've yet to get an MPH in social and behavioral science, but I'm interested in human-centered design, UX or digital health. So this person, I think, has a really good pulse on sort of what's happening in this sort of broader space. Is it still worth getting an MPH? So what do folks think about that?
I would say yes, but if I knew about where I'm at now before I got an MPH, I would navigate my graduate program a bit differently. So for example, the main thing I would do is that summer between the first and second year, I would get a UX research internship. A lot of the big tech companies have internship and you specifically need to be a student. And so I would take advantage of my student status to apply for internships. And then what I did do though was try to get a role where I am not just assisting with research, but maybe just have slightly more of a reach in leading research or leading some sort of work stream, or just being able to show that I can conduct end-to-end research, because that's a really big thing when it comes to working as a UX researcher. And then one thing I always tell people who are in their MPH program is that you don't have to stick to research that's only being conducted in the School of Public Health. When I was at Emory, I did research in, I think it was the School of Public Policy, and it was about like housing and health and like all of that. And that's a program evaluation I still talk about to this day. So I would still get the MPH, but I would definitely take advantage of already knowing a bit more about UX research and where I want to be, for sure.
Yeah, if you're somebody who's contemplating the idea of an MPH, I'd say if you care about public health and about being in that space and about contributing to just healthcare, or public health in any capacity, definitely pursue an MPH. I think it puts you in a position to kind of be in those spaces more readily, and to be more well equipped to be able to participate and contribute to those. I precisely pursued an MPH because I knew I was kind of interested in the wide world of public health and all of that it covers, but precisely because I wanted to be able to adapt to whatever it is that I really wanted to, to practice in the future. I wasn't really sure what that was going to be. Doing the EPI program was really about getting a really good foundation about data, getting a really good foundation about public health and how we understand the public health challenges that we have today, and acquiring other skills. And in the meantime, like Michelle is saying, to really kind of gear my career path to, or just, move it in the directions that I kind of of what was interesting to me at the time. I totally agree with Michelle that I probably would do some things differently if I knew where I am now, what I'd like to do now. I probably would have, sought out other types of opportunities than I did, but than I did at the time. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that, the things that I was able to kind of invest my time in, and the types of research that I did, they all kind of, regardless of what they weren't super HCD focused at the time. I did research on congenital diseases in pediatrics when I was in epi. So it's like that has really not a lot to do with what I do now. But I found a lot of other ways to kind of complement my learning, and being at events like this is something that I probably would have loved to be a part of when I was getting my degree in 2018, 2020. So yeah, I would probably do things a little bit differently, but I think doing an MPH is what kind of allowed me to have that adaptability, to be in a position to really present myself as a public health practitioner and professional, and a human-centered practitioner as well. Because with an MPH, you're really kind of diving into the empathy that you have as an individual and putting it into practice. And I'm sure all the other panelists here would agree that we carry that into a lot of the work that we do, and it allows us to implement HCD practices in our work day to day, which is essential, right? You'll hear about it a lot. So yeah, if that's a space you care about being in any capacity, be it health policy, be it public health programs, or healthcare, or pharma, or whatever it may be, an MPH is a good step in that direction.
Very good.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Julian is saying. Like, I think if this person is really interested, like in health tech specifically, or like med tech, or digital health, I think the fact that you have domain knowledge from an MPH, it will give you an edge. I do think, like, I love that from an MPH you can sort of gain a lot of the skill sets that you need for human-centered design without actually doing like an HCD type program. I think you have sort of like more versatility if you have both the domain knowledge and the skill sets. And also, one thing I will say is that like UX and design fields are super interdisciplinary. There's people from like all walks of life that are now UX researchers, so that's something that is like very well accepted, and honestly celebrated. I think it makes the field super interesting and even stronger. One thing that I would recommend that I feel like I actually did in my program at Rollins, no shade to global health, but I did switch from global health to BSHE because I felt like the curriculum was a bit more focused on like skills. So I think developing those research skills, quant, qual, kind of all of the things that you can kind of absorb. I think uh, it's really the skills that are going to be most transferable kind of wherever you go. Um, and then, supplement as you can with HCD related, courses. There's tons of online courses. There's tons of certificates from different design organizations that you can take that sort of will make sure that you're well versed in like design language, some of these design skills that I talked about that like you might not get from an MPH, which I think that's sort of the path that I took. I ended up doing a UX boot camp as a supplement. I actually didn't even have to finish it before I found a job. So it's entirely possible to kind of like supplement in the area of HCD.
Yeah, I would
Love it.
add to that, Katie,
Yeah.
because in the UX HCD world, even when I was at Best Buy, I think my manager was like the only one with a traditional HCD background. He had a degree in human computer interaction, but we had like a former professor, we had a social worker, we had someone who worked in like community-based or like grassroots and policy. So it's very well accepted and celebrated to come from all walks of life and then become a UX researcher. And I also want to touch on what you mentioned in your intro about an MPH and hard skills. I think I have beef with the community because I think when we think of hard skills, I always see people talking about like, oh, I don't have any hard skills. I need to learn like R. Like R is a software. That's simply just it's just a tool. So
Yes.
hard
Yes.
skills is the program evaluation and the qualitative research and the quantitative and like translating really technical and scientific information to general audiences. Like that's something that's useful as a UX researcher, or if you want to also go into tech and be a content designer or UX writer, like everything you're getting from the MPH, all of those are technical, like hard skills. And so I think that also needs to be really discussed and celebrated. Like, don't feel like you don't have any skills or hard skills because you don't know how to use R. Because I don't know how to use R. And I
Right.
I already
them to
forgot.
pretty
I love it. I love that framing. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I'd love to build off of that because I also see a couple of
Mhm.
questions in here about like how did you learn the terminology? How like what did you do to take these skills and transfer them from public health to this new like human-centered design world? And I will say part of it is knowing what your skills are. So like knowing what what it is that you know, what you've learned from the MPH. So just like Michelle said, what are those skills that you learned? We learned how to conduct research. If you did like socio-behavioral measurement, you learned how to build a survey from scratch, which is like very hard. Props to anybody who is like developing brand new surveys. That class took me out.
Mhm.
But like you are learning all of these key skills. So really have an understanding of like, okay, what do I know? And then something that was super helpful for me was talking to people who are already in the industry. I I approached my pivot. I pivoted out of government, like a very public health government focused role, into a purely tech industry role. And I treated that pivot literally like a research project because I can't help myself. So I was like, what don't I know? What are my gaps in understanding? And like, who are the people that can help me fill in those gaps? I talked to like 15 people. I treated each interview like an individual like interview session. iterated my questions, like literally a research project, but like just getting an understanding and talking to them, like, what does your day-to-day look like? What are the skills that you're using? What technologies do you use at your organization? And then like taking steps to fill in those gaps for myself. One of the pieces of advice that I got from, I think it was like, I had been talking to people for like months. This was probably like my 15th person. And we were just like talking, and he was like, you are already doing the thing. So you need to
Yes.
stop acting as if you don't know what you're doing. You are doing it. You just have
So
to
important.
like, here is the words that you need. So I'll say what I did. I think I still have this Excel spreadsheet somewhere, but I took all of the like public health words that I knew, and then I found all of the like industry terms that I was seeing everywhere. And I just like put the definitions of them side by side so that I could literally draw a line like, oh, this in public health means this in industry. This over here is this thing. Yes, the Nielsen Norman group was key for building that Excel spreadsheet. If I can find it, I'm happy to like share it however we
Oh,
want.
that's going to be a follow-up to this webinar.
Yeah,
The
definitely.
spreadsheet.
But like it was so helpful just to like build that knowledge base by talking to actual practitioners and being like, okay, this is what you guys are doing. This is what I have experience doing, and this is where that line is.
Yep.
I also really struggled with like the storytelling part for the first like portion of my like attempt to transition. It was really hard for me to get to like the core of what it was that I was interested in. So I really had to sit and reflect and be like, okay, what is the thing that is most important to me in my roles? For me, it was empowering communities of color, individuals of color to promote their own like health and well-being. That was like the core of everything that I was doing. And so once I found that key theme and piece, it was so much easier to draw that line through how all of my experiences linked together, because everyone was like, okay, you started in education and then you went to public health and now you're in tech, you're in like cloud services. What's going on here?
You can, but the part you can see the thread, right?
Yeah.
You know the thread. You know there's a thread there, which is really powerful, right?
Yeah, but they don't. So once you know it,
Right.
it's a lot easier for you to like talk through it with other people. So yeah.
Well, I love this point you're making, because as the Rollins Alumni Board, one of the things we really try to do is help alumni think about these sort of transitions. So let's say you have a background in epi. Do you know that those skills are really marketable in tech? Do you know that those are really marketable in all these other sectors? So what you're saying is really, it's not only spot on, but I think it's really relatable, because, you know that you have these skills, you know that you have this background, but how do you communicate it? How do you position it? And I was kind of joking, but I would love to be able to share any resources that you all have from your experiences, even this spreadsheet, because then it's a really practical sort of way for folks that are in attendance today to think about their own journey as they think about, human-centered design. What does that mean for them? I want to be quickly mindful of time. There are a ton of questions that are coming through from participants and comments in the chat. Please keep those coming, because we'll spend a few minutes at the end answering some of them. But I do want to pose this question to the group. And this was something that came out of conversations with Michelle when we were thinking about this session. And by way of quick background, I worked in the government tech innovation space for about 15 years. When I first started, this was all described as user-centered design, right? Then there was a focus on human-centered. And most recently, I've started to see people moving away from human-centered into people-centered. And it's kind of taking on a bit of a life of its own, and people are kind of rebranding, repositioning some of these approaches and skills and things that are really important as you think about what we're talking about today. So I'd love to hear from the group, what does that mean for you? Is there a difference between user-centered, human-centered, people-centered? And if so, how do you distinguish the three?
I think there's a huge difference. And
Yeah.
a lot of the, I think in human-centered design, and a lot of designers and human-centered design practitioners, one thing that characterizes them or characterizes us is that you have to be very intentional about most of the decisions that you're making and most of the terminology that you're using and what you're applying. And to me, there's a lot of intention behind using a term like user-centered versus people-centered versus human-centered.
Mhm.
I think in my professional experience, I saw that the sort of the reframing of each of that same kind of concept, but in those three different ways, have very direct impacts or changes in the work that we were doing and the questions that we would be asking and the information that we would be getting in return. When I think about user-centered, you're really, you're the term user is really you're framing it around someone who's interacting with a product, a website, a tool, an application. And so the things that you're interested from a user-centered perspective, and from a user's perspective, are probably how they interact with a certain part of your website. How are they able to navigate from this page to that page? Are they able to use this feature successfully to get to the information that they need? And so these are very kind of user-centered things that you care about. But if you think about it from a people-centered perspective, then you realize that these are people from, you reframe from like a user who's like just interacting with a website to a person who is a part of a team and has objectives that they need to achieve and goals that they need to get to and things that they need to accomplish. And so from a people-centered perspective, I'd care more about how quickly can they find this piece of information so that they can take it back to the team and do the actual thing that they want to achieve. Or in the case where I worked in Medicaid policy, is like how quickly can they feel like they've covered all of the material that they need to cover so that they can respond to this email as quickly as possible. And that's very different from can they successfully navigate from here to here. It's a whole different dimension. And if you go from human-centered, it's even it's a whole other reframe. These are humans with emotions, with emotional needs. They want to feel fulfilled. They want to feel productive, and they want to kind of influence a certain change in the community. And it's much broader. And so you start to care about those a different set of things, and these are different sets of things that you can measure, and you'd probably measure them differently. You'd probably conduct for a user-centered perspective, you'll do some kind of usability testing, and you may ask very technical questions or think about things from a much more kind of technical perspective and digital perspective. But from a human-centered perspective, you might just be having you'll conduct an interview and ask more open-ended and broader questions and really dig into deeper feelings of fulfillment, of frustration, and things like that. So I'd care about, are they feeling really frustrated when they're using my tool? When do they get really frustrated, and when do they feel like they've fulfilled their task in using our application, our tool, or our website? And so yeah, I think those reframing between those different three terms, which are all kind of meaning the same concept or embodying the same concept, it has direct implications in how you're able to apply your work. And I think that's the key difference. Yeah, I'm curious what other folks think though.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it through the lens of tech too, in particular for folks that have experience in tech, because there's a bit of a buzz around it. Yeah. What do other folks think?
This doesn't directly answer the question. I feel like with this question, my rage comes from really the fact that I think this is partially why I ended up creating public health and tech. I feel like the more like someone will come out with something new, and I think that's fine. I still just feel like it's old. I still feel like every time I see a new term, like I feel like that's what my public health career is about. Like people mentioning like, oh, we should be human-centered. It's like, well, we probably could have told you that at least 50 years ago, but I'm glad that, we figured that out in like 2015 or 2016. So I think that's just another reason why I love having a public health background, because I'm so concerned with not only the product or the service, but the person, their environment, their mental models, just any challenges they're going through. All of that is going to influence someone's behavior and how they interact with anything that you're building. And so I just love bringing those perspectives into any of like the services that we're designing. And I think that's another thing that like having a public health background can help with, like those discussions.
I love it.
I mean, if you're, well, first of all, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think Julian, your explanation of kind of like the implications of what these terms might need was great. I think from like a big tech perspective, like, yeah, like these terms are floating around. I don't think people care as much about them as like I feel like terminology is much carries so much more weight in sort of like academic circles or like public health circles. I feel like in tech, there's definitely like pockets of tech, like civic tech and like inclusive design and human-centered design, where people are like very intentional with like the words that they're using, and they're sort of but I think more than anything, people sort of use these terms to represent their own philosophy of how they work and how they do research and how they want to design. um, yeah, so I think like all of these terms are sort of like widely accepted and used within big tech. It's not going to be like a big taboo if you're using one of them and not the other. I think personally, like anything but user is a really good way to go. Um, yeah, sorry, that's all I have to say about that.
No, I love this. And I think this is one of the themes coming out of this conversation, right? Like, how do you, how do you distill all the wording, right? The different terms, the different movements behind this type of work. And so if you are looking really practically at like a new job, or you're a student at Rollins and you're thinking about jobs, to your point earlier, use search words, user-centered, human-centered, people-centered, because generally they're going to be in the same space. There's going to be definitely some nuance to what Julian says for sure, and I absolutely agree with that. But there's a way to sort of consolidate your thinking. So as you're thinking about a career, if you're thinking about a new job, if you're thinking about an internship, to your point earlier, like use those terms in a way that's to your advantage, because then you're going to cast a net wider and be able to see, hey, my background coming out of Rollins as a student, or maybe I'm 5 years out of Rollins and I've been working in a traditional public health role, I'm really marketable because all these different types of opportunities are being pulled up and they connect back to my core skills coming out of Rollins as an MPH grad. So I love this. So what I'd love to do is, and then we'll get into some of the questions in the chat. The final question for you all is really around potentially a career change. Folks are thinking about maybe how to adapt a current role that they're in and bring in human-centered design approaches. You mentioned a boot camp. You mentioned getting training that can be a complement to your MPH. If you're someone that is thinking about an MPH, this is a whole point of conversation. If you're someone that's maybe 10 years plus in your career and you're interested in making a career shift, would love for the group to just kind of give their thoughts on what you'd recommend, and maybe what you did as you thought about a career in human-centered design, and what that means for you practically. So we'll kind of open it up.
I feel like I have a ton to say, but I'm gonna be fast.
Okay.
I do have, when it comes to students, if you're a current student, look at internships. If you're maybe within 1 year of graduating, there are a lot of like new grad or recent grad programs that big tech companies will have. And then if you feel like, I don't know, like I feel like my skills are like totally different, I don't know where to get my foot in, maybe try apprenticeships. Like I know Pinterest has an apprenticeship, Meta has an apprenticeship, and that's just for anyone they would consider a career transitioner. And all of those, at least at like larger corporate and big tech companies, are usually paid and paid very well. I would also, as much as we're here saying like all of these things are connected, use the time in your interview to explain how they're connected, but your resume needs to show that connection very directly. And I think those are two distinctions that need to be made, because someone who's looking at your resume, whether it's like the recruiter, they're really just looking for like specific bullet points. And you don't have a voiceover on your resume to tell them that story. You can tell them when you're in person and you have that first interview. But understanding how to like translate your resume. So there are a lot of great, like I said, Nielsen Norman. There are some UX research YouTubers.
Mhm.
And I can send this all to you. And I also have a post on public health and tech with all of these resources. I'm just trying to remember it because I don't have it up right now. But I think that's all for now.
Okay. And as a quick note for folks that are in attendance today, we will send a follow-up with the recording, et cetera, but we'll make sure we get some of these resources that people are talking about, the group. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I remembered one more thing. There's something called Hack for LA, and there's another one. Like I said, I'll send it, but they partner with nonprofits and different like social impact businesses, and you can volunteer as a UX researcher or UX writer or anything that you're interested in. And I think that's a really great way to also have that like public health social impact frame to it, but have that real world experience that you can put in a portfolio and directly put on your resume. And it's also going to be in context. So you're going to be working with the actual client, working with engineers and designers, and it'll be a great project to speak to in your interviews.
Love it.
Yeah, I think all of what Michelle's been saying is spot on. I found that when I was struggling a lot in trying to do this career shift with being able to communicate my experiences and my skills in a way that allowed other people who were considering me for a position to understand that I had the capabilities to fulfill that type of role. And I found my most success when I did a couple of things. The first is, like Michelle said, translate your resume as much as you can to the nomenclature that is used in the field that you're interested in, for the role that you're interested in. Change it. If you did field work, call it ethnography or call it something different. If you did and find different ways to kind of reframe a lot of the work, the skills and the methods that you've applied to fit the mold for how the people in this other kind of industry think about those things. Because remember that these skills are in your bag. Like this is stuff that you already know how to do and you've probably done before in multiple ways. And like they were saying earlier, it's about how you tell that story. And so changing that changing my resume to really resonate with that the folks in that different industry was a huge game changer for me. The second was building a portfolio. I saw a question around here somewhere about it. I'd say it's not often required, but it's definitely highly encouraged. I didn't when they told me to build a portfolio, I'm like, build a portfolio. It's like where do I even start? Like I don't even have experiences to put down in a portfolio, but you probably really do. I found like a I spoke to a lot of people in the process of doing this, and I think this was mentioned earlier as well. Talk to as many people as you can. You'll learn so much about how to position yourself and how to really kind of market yourself as a potential candidate. But one of the things that was recommended to me was, in lack of experience, find a passion project to get involved in. Do some of that volunteer work that Michelle was saying. There's others that are kind of other types of volunteer opportunities for UX researchers, or just make a project up and think about something that you're really interested in and just do the work and put it in your portfolio. I did that with some of the work that I was doing in 2018. I worked at the Puerto Rico Vector Control Unit, and I was super interested in human-centered design, and I just kind of wanted to see how it worked. And this is before I even knew I needed a portfolio. And I was interviewing people as part of my work, and I had some mock data down and stuff. And I used that to kind of build my first sort of case study for my portfolio. And to me, that was another thing that really moved the needle and allowed me to kind of capture some more opportunities. There's plenty of resources out there, and I'm happy to kind of share my portfolio out there for folks to review and to connect with anybody on this, because to me it was I remember feeling really blocked because I couldn't build one, but it's actually very straightforward, and you definitely have experiences and skills and just something in your history and your background to put into that. And lastly, uh, I think one of the things that really hit home for me and allowed me to find a good opportunity, to allow me to be successful in finding an opportunity, was to really focus on the ones that aligned the most with my values and my background and my interests. I spent a lot of time applying to a bunch of like maybe internships and other kind of early or associate roles that I felt like, why wouldn't they give me this opportunity? But it was just, maybe they were just random companies and they had really not a lot to do with what with who I am and with the experiences that I had had and what I care about. And I started to really find a lot of momentum when I was being really intentional about where I was applying and curating a lot of my applications and my materials to those roles. Instead of spending a lot of time just kind of shooting a bunch of emails and applications, I really, crafted my applications for maybe 3 ones that, were, in civic tech or government facing, because I had worked in government consulting for a little while, or ones that were, more related to public health, or in any capacity, because this is, the degree that I have and the work and the time where I spent the work that I've spent the most time in. And so, really, listen to what it is that makes you you, and kind of characterizes your experiences and your history, and use that as a lens or as a filter for the opportunities that you want to pursue. That to me was the best way to spend my time and to find the most the highest rate of interviews and of just moving on with applications.
Very good.
I just want to.
Any final thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to really quickly add on to what Julian was saying, particularly about the portfolio, because that was a place where I got really stuck as well. One, I just want to say there is a slight distinction between like a UX design portfolio and a UX research portfolio. So the advice that I'm going to share is specifically for a UX research portfolio. But that portfolio really focuses on like your methodology, like how did you approach the problem? And then also like what was a result of the research that you did? So like they don't care as much about like your findings. It's not super important. Like you can include it, but the real like focus is what did you do? What were your methods? Like how did you approach this research? And then what was done with that research when you finished? So did they change features? And then like how many people did that impact as a result? And it took me a really long time to get like a format down, but the way I think about it now, and any of you correct me if this is not right, but I think about it as like each use case is like a poster presentation. If you've ever done a poster presentation, I think of each use case as just like taking your poster presentation, and each of those sections that you would have on there is like a slide. So you want to give like background information and context, your methods, your findings, and then talk more broadly about like the impact, if that is a helpful way to think about it. But yeah.
I love it. I think it's a very practical way. And I love the theme that you all are talking about, which is get innovative, use some ingenuity. If you want to test something out, try it. Seek out different opportunities that give you the experience, right? Because I think that's a huge component of this. If you have an MPH or you've got some background in public health, the ability to showcase how you can bring those skills into a human-centered design role is paramount, right? And that's what I think I've found in the government tech space. You can bring in people that have amazing backgrounds in tech. They're technologists. They know a specific platform or have a specific skill. If you have all that and an MPH, your value and marketability is just even more tremendous, because you're bringing a different way of thinking about addressing challenges. And this was one of the questions we had in the chat, and we're running up on time. And Michelle, by the way, I think we might have our 2.0 version for this conversation in 2025, because I think we're getting into a space of how do you practically think about this world, right? Like there's so many dimensions, there's so many different use cases, there's so many different terminology that's being used in this space. And how can we sort of codify that a bit more for Rollins alum and students as they think about career pathways? So I think we're onto something here, which I'd love to explore in 2025. And for folks that are in attendance, let us know your feedback on this session, if there's more specific detail that you'd like to get more information about. But I just really love the premise and the theme that you all have brought out from today, which is, one, you have an MPH, you're very marketable in the space. Two, there are a tremendous amount of opportunities that might not have the same wording or vocabulary that you're used to in traditional public health circles, but you're very marketable to jump into those types of roles. And then I think three, I think it's really exciting. Michelle, you mentioned this point, is public health professionals and people with MPHs have been talking about this for decades. And I think we can continue to be leaders in helping to shape what this looks like, so that you do ride the wave and a momentum that's come out of this type of work in the last 10, 15 years. but you continue to ground it in the practical reality of what is needed. And at the end of the day, it's about who you serve in communities that public health leaders really want to embrace and ideally create better health outcomes for folks. So I love the conversation. Thank you all the panelists for your time today. I do think there's a 2.0 discussion that we'll think about and brainstorm and get back to the alumni community about in 2025, because I just think this is a really relevant topic. It's a great topic to go deeper on, and we can really start to bring some more practical opportunities for alumni and students as they think about careers. So thanks again. Thank you all for those that are in attendance today. We'll be sure to get the recording. We'll get the resources. And if you have any feedback for us, do let us know.